Long before Christopher Nolan ever picked up the story, The Odyssey was already one of the most important works in human history. Attributed to Homer and composed nearly 3,000 years ago, the poem follows Odysseus as he struggles to return home after the Trojan War. But it is much more than an ancient adventure story. It is a tale about endurance, temptation, identity, loyalty, and the emotional costs of surviving a long and brutal journey. For centuries, readers have returned to it because it asks questions that never stop mattering. What does it mean to come home? What does war do to a person? And how much of ourselves do we lose along the way? That is what makes The Odyssey such a fascinating story for a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan. In this video today, I'm going to explore how Nolan puts his ideas, themes, and idiosyncrasies into The Odyssey and how much he turned Homer's poem into a Nolan epic. To understand why Nolan's version feels so distinct, you first have to understand Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker. Every great director has a cinematic language, a set of recurring themes, techniques, and obsessions that appear throughout their work. For Nolan, those obsessions are time, memory, identity, guilt, sacrifice, and the fragile line between objective reality and personal perception. Whether he's making a superhero film, a science fiction epic, or a historical drama, those ideas remain constant. His films are rarely about the plot on the surface. They're about the psychological and philosophical questions underneath it. Because of that, Nolan doesn't simply adapt stories, he reconstructs them through his own worldview. The Odyssey wasn't just another classic for him to bring to the screen, it was an opportunity to explore the very ideas that have defined his career, making the film feels less like a traditional Greek epic and more like the culmination of the themes and filmmaking techniques he has been refining for nearly 3 decades. One of Christopher Nolan's defining traits as a filmmaker is his fascination with time, not simply as a measure of minutes and hours, but as simply a storytelling device. Rather than presenting events in a straightforward, chronological order, Nolan often fractures time to place the audience inside the perspective of his characters. Memento unfolds in reverse to mirror Leonard's inability to form new memories. The Prestige layers diaries, flashbacks, and competing narratives to blur the line between truth and illusion. And Inception places multiple timelines on top of one another, each moving at a different speed, while Dunkirk tells 3 separate stories unfolding over a week, a day, and an hour before converging into a single climax. Even Oppenheimer, despite being a historical drama, abandons a linear structure to explore memory, consequence, and perspective simultaneously. Nolan has often said that he is interested in subjective time, the way people remember events rather than how they objectively happened. This obsession makes The Odyssey a natural fit for his filmmaking style. Homer's poem is already told through memories, flashbacks, and stories within stories, with Odysseus recounting much of his journey long after it has happened. Rather than forcing the epic into a conventional structure, Nolan embraces its fragmented nature, using his signature nonlinear storytelling to make the audience experience the uncertainty, longing, and emotional weight of Odysseus' journey, rather than just simply watching it unfold. Also, it's a story about waiting. It is about waiting to return home, waiting for family, and waiting for a war to finally end. Nolan understands how to turn that kind of waiting into something cinematic and emotionally heavy. Christopher Nolan has long been committed to grounding even his most extraordinary stories in a tangible sense of reality. While many filmmakers rely heavily on computer-generated imagery to create spectacle, Nolan prefers practical effects, real locations, and physical sets whenever possible. From rotating hallways built for Inception to the full-scale recreation of the Trinity test in Oppenheimer, and the real ships and aircrafts used in Dunkirk, he believes audiences instinctively respond to images that have genuine weight and texture. This philosophy carries directly into The Odyssey. In the original Odyssey poem, the story focuses a lot on the Greek gods and magic much more than it does in the actual movie. Nolan omits a few things in the movie like the magic bag of wind, and the fact that the gods literally play a huge role in the story. Not just Athena, and even she is turned into just a figment of Odysseus' guilt in the movie. Not to say that Nolan takes all of the fantastical elements out, there are plenty of those in the movie, like the Cyclops scene, the Scylla scene, and the Sirens scene play a huge role in the movie, but the story focuses a lot more on Odysseus' struggles coping with what he did at the Trojan War, and losing all of his crew on this 20-year voyage. What I'm saying is this: rather than presenting the epic as a fantastical fairy tale, Nolan treats its world as a harsh and believable place shaped by nature, war, and survival. The vast oceans, towering cliffs, and ancient cities feel weathered and lived in, making Odysseus' journey seem physically exhausting rather than simply mythical. Even when the story ventures into the realm of legend, Nolan frames these moments with a grounded visual style that emphasizes the character's emotional and physical experiences over pure spectacle. The result is an adaptation that makes one of the history's oldest myths feel immediate and authentic, allowing audiences to believe that these extraordinary events could have unfolded in a real, dangerous world. This directly ties into how Nolan presents his characters. Although Odysseus may be one of literature's oldest heroes, Nolan reimagines him as the culmination of the protagonists who have defined his career. Like Leonard Shelby in Memento, he is haunted by the past and is driven by memories he can't escape. Like Bruce Wayne in the Dark Knight trilogy, he is a warrior whose greatest battles are fought within himself, forced to sacrifice parts of his own humanity for what he believes is a greater good. Like Robert Angier in The Prestige, his obsession comes at a tremendous personal cost, blurring the line between determination and self-destruction. Like Dom Cobb in Inception, he is consumed by guilt and longs to return to the family he left behind, discovering that the emotional journey home is far more difficult than the physical one. Like Cooper in Interstellar, he is a father separated from his family by forces beyond his control, measuring the passage of time through the relationships he desperately hopes to reclaim. Even Oppenheimer served as a clear parallel, a man celebrated as a hero while privately wrestling with the devastating consequences of his own actions. Across nearly every Christopher Nolan film, the protagonist is burdened by memory, sacrifice, and the consequences of choices that can never be undone. In The Odyssey, these recurring themes converge on Odysseus, making him feel less like a departure from Nolan's filmography and more like the character he had been building toward all along. Again, going back to the poem, Odysseus is the embodiment of the Greek concept of metis, intelligence, cunning, and resourcefulness. Nearly every obstacle he overcomes is solved through wit rather than strength. His trick against the Cyclops, his disguises upon returning to Ithaca, and his ability to manipulate both allies and enemies establish him as one of mythology's greatest strategists. Although he experiences grief and hardship, Homer primarily celebrates Odysseus as a hero whose greatest weapon is his mind. Nolan's interpretation shifts that focus inward. His Odysseus is still intelligent and resourceful, but those qualities are no longer his defining characteristic. Instead, Nolan presents him as a man haunted by war, guilt, and the consequences of his actions. The journey is less about outsmarting monsters and enduring the emotional scars left by years of violence and loss. Rather than asking whether Odysseus can survive the voyage, Nolan asks whether he can survive the weight of everything he has done. In doing so, the film transforms the Odyssey from a story about the triumph of human ingenuity into a meditation of trauma, redemption, and whether someone can truly return home after being forever changed by war. Another hallmark of Christopher Nolan's filmmaking is the way he treats music as a fundamental storytelling tool rather than simple accompaniment. Throughout his career, sound has rarely existed just to support the image. It often became the emotional engine driving the narrative. Working with composers like Hans Zimmer and Ludwig Göransson, Nolan has developed a style where music builds relentless tension, blurs the boundaries between score and sound design, and immerses the audience in a character's psychological state. In films such as Dunkirk, the Shepard tone creates the illusion of constantly rising tension, while Oppenheimer uses an increasingly anxious score to mirror the moral weight bearing down on its protagonist. The Odyssey continues this tradition. The music of the Odyssey is one of the film's most powerful storytelling devices, continuing Christopher Nolan's tradition of using the score to shape emotion rather than simply accompanying the action. Composed by Ludwig Göransson, the score combines ancient instrumentation with modern technology, creating a soundscape that feels both timeless and intensely modern. Rather than emphasizing triumphant heroism, the music reflects Odysseus' emotional journey, alternating between moments of haunting introspection and overwhelming intensity. Deep percussion echoes the relentless force of the sea, while mournful strings and distant choir vocals evoke the longing for home that lies at the heart of the story. Like Göransson's work on Oppenheimer, the score often builds in layers, gradually increasing tension until it becomes almost overwhelming before retreating into moments of quiet reflection. Nolan has always believed that music should immerse audiences in a character's state of mind. The Odyssey is no exception. The score doesn't merely underscore the adventure, it allows the audience to experience Odysseus' fear, hope, exhaustion, and determination, making the emotional journey as unforgettable as the physical one. Also, you cannot talk about Christopher Nolan without mentioning scale. The Odyssey is the first feature film ever to be shot entirely on 70mm IMAX, something Nolan had always wanted to do since the beginning of his filmmaking career. Throughout his filmography, he has continually pushed the boundaries of what the format can achieve, believing that larger images create a greater sense of immersion and emotional impact. From the car chase in The Dark Knight, and to the frozen landscapes of Interstellar, and to the final war scene in Tenet, Nolan has consistently used IMAX not simply to make things look bigger, but to make audiences feel physically present within the story. The Odyssey represents the culmination of that philosophy. An epic that has inspired audiences for nearly 3,000 years demands a canvas worthy of its legacy, and Nolan embraces that challenge by capturing vast oceans, towering cliffs, ancient cities, and sweeping landscapes with a level of clarity and scale that mirrors the grandeur of Homer's poem. Yet true to Nolan's style, the spectacle never exists for its own sake. The immense IMAX frame isn't just there to showcase beautiful vistas, it reinforces the emotional isolation of Odysseus, making him appear like a lone figure struggling against a world that is unimaginably vast. In many ways, The Odyssey isn't simply Nolan's biggest film. It's the realization of a technical and artistic ambition he has been pursuing for decades, using the largest cinematic format available to tell one of humanity's oldest and greatest stories. Now, I've been talking about the things that I like about The Odyssey and how it connects to Nolan's whole filmography, but there was one specific thing that I didn't like about this movie. First of all, I didn't feel very immersed into the ancient Greek world that this movie is trying to represent. The reason I say this actually ties back to a lot of Nolan's work. It works in his earlier movies, but it actually works against him in this movie. While I was watching the movie, there was something that was just distracting me throughout the movie. It wasn't the actors, it was the dialogue. Many people have criticized Nolan's use of dialogue over the years. Many have argued that dialogue in Nolan's movies feel very overly expository and emotionally restrained. His movies are very big and expansive, and sometimes they need expository dialogue to have the whole film make sense. In this movie, the writing feels like modern-day writing plopped onto an ancient Greek setting, without it feeling like a movie fully embracing the ancient Greek setting. Not to say that Nolan's writing is terrible in this movie, but I just can't picture ancient Greek people yelling the F word over and over again at people. I mean, imagine if Robert Eggers directed this movie. I feel like other than Nolan, he would be the perfect guy to give the people the ancient Greek feeling to the film with the writing. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey isn't trying to replace Homer's masterpiece, nor should it. The original poem has survived for nearly 3,000 years because every generation finds something new within it. What Nolan has done is continue that tradition. He doesn't retell the Odyssey exactly as Homer wrote it, he reinterprets it through the lens of the questions that have defined his own career. Time, memory, guilt, sacrifice, identity, and the search for home have always been the cornerstones of Nolan's filmmaking, and The Odyssey becomes the perfect vessel for exploring those ideas. His nonlinear storytelling, commitment to realism, practical filmmaking, immersive sound design, massive IMAX photography, and psychologically driven characters all transform an ancient epic into something unmistakably his own. That doesn't mean every creative decision will work for everyone. Some viewers may prefer a more faithful adaptation, while others may find Nolan's restrained dialogue or emphasis on psychology at odds with the adventurous spirit of Homer's poem. But great adaptations aren't measured by how closely they imitate their source material, they are measured by whether they justify their own existence. Nearly 3,000 years after Homer first told the story of Odysseus, Christopher Nolan proves that The Odyssey still has new questions to ask and new emotions to uncover. Thank you all for watching, hope you loved this video, and like and subscribe to Film 513.